Hey guys, Spooky Cat here. My house is, I'm pretty sure, haunted. So if you guys would like to see a video on that, make sure to leave a like and a comment saying that you want to see a video on that. Enjoy the video.
A few years ago I used to work as a cashier at an off-license booze shop when I was back home on breaks from university. It was a fairly small, open-plan shop with fridges full of soft drinks and beers lining two of the walls. A third wall lined with a selection of wines, and a counter spanning the length of the fourth with spirits and cigarettes behind to discourage shoplifters. Behind the counter was a doorway through to a storeroom with a desk and chair for cashing up, etc. A safe, a CCTV camera with a small black and white monitor which ran 24/7 and recorded to an attached VHS recorder, a small basin and kettle, and of course all the stock. Since I was only working temporarily that went back from uni, I got stuck with a lot of the shitty shifts that nobody else wanted to work. The late shifts were 6 to 11 p.m. and since the evenings tended to be quieter than midday, only one person worked the shift, except weekends. So it was winter and I was working a shitty midweek late shift. It had been snowing fairly heavily, so the shop was quieter than usual. When the place was quiet, I would sit in the stockroom at the back at the desk and read a book and chain smoke. The door had a sensor attached to a speaker in the back which would make a shrill beep anytime someone came in, so I knew when to get up and walk to the counter. It was getting close to the end of my shift and I was engrossed in some book when I glanced up to the CCTV monitor. Someone was walking down the far wall of the shop next to the beer fridges. The black and white monitor was fairly grainy, but I could make the person out to be a tall, pale man wearing a dark suit. I stood up to walk to the counter to serve him, assuming I had somehow not heard the beep as the door opened. I got to the shop front, gave my usual greeting of "Hey, can I help you with anything?" and was met with dead silence. I scanned the shop front and the shop was empty. What the fuck, I say to myself. I try and rationalize things in my head. The CCTV monitor is flickery, and they reuse old tapes, so the image from a previous tape has blurred onto it somehow. And I'm tired, and my eyes are playing tricks on me. Satisfied with my own justification of events, I trudge back into the stockroom to make a coffee and wake myself up a bit. As I go to click the kettle on, I glance over to my desk looking for my mug. The CCTV monitor is filled with a pale white face with black hollow eyes staring vacantly back at me. I was frozen to the spot and felt my stomach turn. The CCTV camera is mounted on the ceiling about 9 to 10 feet high in the far corner behind the till. The one corner of the stop I can't quite see through the doorway of the stockroom. I was staring into its cold hollow eyes right up until the monitor screen turned black. A couple years ago I worked as a school bus driver in an Ohio school district. It's a pretty rough job getting up early to pick up groggy teenagers and driving them back home on the same route day after day after day. It came as a bit of a relief when I was assigned to a different bus with a different route. The former driver had suffered from a stroke or some heart-related problems. I'm not too certain on the details. Anyways, I was assigned to cover his after-school route. There were a few buses which would drive students who had after-school activities home a few hours after dismissal. I had never driven a late bus before, but I was up for the challenge. The first thing I noticed on my first few days working the late shift was just how dark it got in the winter afternoons. It was a bit weird lingering around the old high school after dark, but I quickly got used to it. The second thing I noticed was how few kids boarded my late bus. I quickly discovered that the sparse amount of students was because my route covered the more sparsely populated areas of the district. This was fine by me, less kids, less noise, but traveling through the more rural areas unnerved me. I was always worried a deer or some other creature would bolt out of the fields and get crushed under the wheels or fly through the windshield. One late afternoon, about a week after I had started working the late shift, was especially slow. It had been a rainy day, so a lot of sports practices had been cancelled. The headlights revealed eerie swirling shapes in the fog. I had closed the doors to keep the heat in, and as a result a thick steam had clouded the windows. I was just sitting there, checking my watch and listening to the radio, when I saw a silhouette at the door out of the corner of my eye. I quickly reached for the lever and opened the door. Standing there was a small boy carrying a backpack that seemed to be half his size. If I had seen him out of context, I would have assumed he was in middle school. He seemed to be hunched over with his head tilted downward. "What stopped?" I asked. The boy remained silent as he lifted his leg. Slowly he began to climb the stairs with footsteps that sounded much too heavy to be coming from a boy his size. "What stopped?" I asked again, trying to see if he had any headphones in. He didn't. The boy turned and started walking down the aisle, taking a seat near the back of the bus. I began to lose my patience. "Look, kid." I looked into the large rear-view mirror and froze. The bus was empty. I spun around and there he was, but now he was looking at me. His expression was cold and his eyes were vacant, but they were staring right at me. I turned to face the front without another word. I forced myself to look back up into the mirror. Nothing. I nearly jumped out of my seat when more kids began boarding the bus. They relayed the stops and continued the normal superficial high school jabber. I watched them take the seats around the middle of the bus in the mirror. I watched to see if they acknowledged the boy without a reflection. But they were too wrapped up in the gossip to notice. With every stop I made, I turned my head ever so slightly to glance out of my peripheral vision to the back of the bus. I refused to look directly back there. Every time I stole a glance, I caught sight of his pale skin. Every time I locked my gaze back on the road, I dropped off the last kid and idled there, uncertain what to do. Whatever was back there didn't tell me what stopped, so I decided to just head back to the bus station. I pulled the bus in and turned off the engine. Taking a deep breath, I slowly turned around. The bus was empty. Unsure whether to be relieved or unnerved, I called out, "Anyone still here?" Silence. I was about to skip my routine check when I noticed the window next to where the boy was sitting was open. Slowly, I crept down the aisle and shut the window. I ignored the streaked finger marks on the fogged glass and booked it. For the next week, the boy would silently board the late bus, trot towards the back of the bus with his giant book bag, and disappear by the time the last kid was dropped off. I would silently ignore him as he boarded, and I carefully checked every student that got off the bus. He never left the bus. I didn't tell anyone about this. They would all think I was crazy and I most likely would have lost my job. That is, until the day I quit. It was another slow and rainy day. Only a few kids boarded the bus, the faces illuminated by the screens of their iPods and cell phones. I was staring out the front window, spacing out, when I impulsively turned my head to the right. There he was. Only this time he wasn't slouched over like he usually was. He was staring right at me with those dead eyes. I quickly looked down at the dashboard, pretending not to see him. Plump one foot on the bus steps. Plump another. Plump another. He stood right next to me for a few seconds. I could feel his eyes on me. Nervously, I tried turning on the radio, but only heard a series of clicks and static scratches. I saw him turn and head down the aisle. I heard something heavy sit down behind me. Oh God, he's right behind me. He's right behind me. I panicked. I looked in the mirror. Of course there was no reflection, but I could hear him in the seat behind me. His breath was slow and almost congested sounding. I began to send up a prayer when the buses in front of me sprung to life and began pulling out of the bus circle. I turned on the engine and followed suit, trying my best to focus on the road. The last kid descended the stairs and walked off towards the safety of the home. I closed the doors and decided to head back towards the bus lot. The breathing seemed closer than ever, and I tried not to think about whatever was behind me, leaning in closer to the back of my neck. I began forming a plan as I distractedly missed a few stop signs. Just park the bus and get the fuck out. Get to your car and just go. I pulled into the lot a little too quickly and turned off the engine. I could still hear the breathing. I unbuckled myself, but before I could get up I heard a click. Then another, and another. I stood up and looked down the aisle. The boy was nowhere to be seen. Crack. Suddenly all of the windows slid down at the same time. Cold, moist air rushed inside the bus. At that point I rushed to the door and bolted outside without even bothering to lock it. As I was running to my car I heard a soft pounding. For the life of me, I could not tell you why I looked back. But I did. Dozens of small hands were pounding on the windows of the bus. The sound of the tiny palms smacking against the glass was deafening. The Claudens slammed against one another as if trying to escape out of the open windows. Too terrified to scream, I bolted to my car and drove faster than I ever have in my life. I resigned the next day. To this day I can't bring myself to look into the windows of passing buses. Recently I've begun to wonder if the driver before me had seen the things I had. I wonder if I had stayed any longer if I would have suffered a similar fate.